Imagine you're winning. Not just winning, you're absolutely dominating. Your enemy's flanks have collapsed. They're running. Victory is literally minutes away. All you need to do is wait. Just wait, but you don't. You charge straight into the one part of the enemy line that's still holding firm, and in doing so, you lose everything. Your life, your army, your kingdom. The fate of an entire civilization. Sound mental, doesn't it? Well, that's exactly what happened on a cold November day in 1444. And the consequences of that one reckless decision would echo through history for centuries. This is the story of the Battle of Varna, and trust me, you've never heard anything quite like this. Let's paint the picture. It's the 10th of November, 1444. The location? A bleak stretch of ground near the Black Sea, not far from the town of Varna in modern-day Bulgaria. 20,000 crusaders are trapped. Properly trapped. They've got the dark waters of the sea behind them, a marshy lake on one side and directly in front. 60,000 Ottoman soldiers, elite troops, the best warriors the empire can muster. The crusaders are outnumbered 3-1, exhausted from weeks of marching, and there's absolutely no way out. Escaping isn't an option. Surrendering? Unthinkable. This is it, do or die. Leading this desperate Christian force are two men who couldn't be more different. First, there's John Hunyadi, known as the White Knight. He's a veteran general, a master tactician, the sort of bloke who thinks 5 moves ahead in every battle. Calm, calculating, brilliant. And then there's his king, Władysław III. He's 20 years old. 20. Burning with ambition, desperate for glory, convinced he's destined for greatness. These two men are about to make history, but not in the way either of them imagined. Now, before we get to the carnage, we need to understand how they ended up in this nightmare situation in the first place. See, just months earlier, John Hunyadi had been riding high. In 1443, he'd led what became known as the Long Campaign, and it had been an absolute masterclass in military strategy. He'd spent his own fortune hiring thousands of mercenaries, including hardened Czech veterans, and launched a gutsy winter offensive deep into Ottoman territory. Winter campaigns were rare in medieval warfare for good reason. They were brutal, exhausting, and risky, but Hunyadi pulled it off brilliantly. He'd smashed one Ottoman army after another, proving to the whole of Europe that the seemingly invincible Turks could actually be beaten. The campaign had been so successful that it forced Sultan Murad II to the negotiating table. The result was the Peace of Szeged, signed in 1444. It was a triumph for the Christian alliance, a 10-year truce. The return of Serbia as a buffer state between the Ottomans and Christian Europe. Everyone should have been celebrating, right? Finally a bit of breathing room. A decade of peace to rebuild and prepare. But then something extraordinary happened. Sultan Murad, genuinely exhausted by decades of warfare, did something almost unprecedented. He abdicated. Just to temp down. Handed the most powerful empire in the world over to his 12-year-old son, Mehmed II, and retired to a life of quiet contemplation. He was done with war. He wanted peace. In the Christian courts of Europe, this looked like divine providence. God himself had delivered them an opportunity. The Ottoman Empire, the existential threat to Christendom, was now ruled by a child. Cardinal Julian Cesarini, a fiery, persuasive churchman, seized the moment. He argued passionately that the peace treaty meant nothing. An oath sworn to an infidel, he claimed, held no spiritual or legal weight in the eyes of God. Breaking it wouldn't be dishonorable, it would be righteous. King Władysław, young and idealistic, desperate to cement his name in history alongside the great crusader kings of the past, agreed. On the 4th of August, 1444, with the ink on the peace treaty barely dry, the oath was shattered. A new crusade was declared. It was a monumentally controversial decision, and many of Hunyadi's advisors were furious. They just won a brilliant diplomatic victory, and now they were throwing it away on a gamble. But the king had made his choice, and Hunyadi, loyal to the end, would follow. The plan was actually rather clever on paper. The Crusader army would march south along the Black Sea coast towards Constantinople. Meanwhile, a combined Venetian and Papal fleet would blockade the Dardanelles, the narrow strait separating Europe and Asia. This would trap Murad's main army on the Asian side, unable to cross. The Crusaders would face only a scattered, leaderless garrison in Europe. Easy pickings. March to Constantinople, liberate the Byzantine capital, and return home as heroes. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. The naval blockade failed. Completely failed. The Genoese, bitter commercial rivals of the Venetians, reportedly ferried Murad's entire army across the Bosphorus for an absolutely eye-watering sum of money. Murad himself, furious at this betrayal of the peace he'd negotiated in good faith, came out of retirement. Legend has it that his young son Mehmed sent him a desperate letter that reads something like, "If you are the Sultan, come and lead your armies. If I am the Sultan, then I order you to come and lead my armies." The old warrior couldn't refuse. He was back, and he was angry. So when the Crusaders arrived at Varna on the 9th of November, expecting to fight scattered garrison troops and a boy sultan, they instead found the full unified might of the Ottoman Empire waiting for them. Murad had gotten there first, cut off their advance and trapped them against the sea. Hunyadi's grim assessment from the night before summed it up perfectly. To escape is impossible. To surrender is unthinkable. Let us fight with bravery and honor our arms. They were going to have to fight their way out. And the odds were appalling. Dawn breaks on the 10th of November. The cold is sharp, biting. John Hunyadi rides along the Crusader line, his breath forming white clouds in the morning air. He's inspecting their last desperate defense, a fortress of wagons all chained together. This is called a wagonburg, a tactic he'd learned from Hussite rebels in Bohemia. It's basically a mobile fort designed to break the Ottoman cavalry charges that had destroyed so many Christian armies in the past. It's clever, it's innovative, and it might just work, might. He glances over at Cardinal Cesarini, the man whose sermons had convinced the king to break that peace treaty. The man whose certainty that God was on their side had led them to this trap. Now, they were about to find out if that certainty was justified. Across the field, Sultan Murad watches from a small hill. This is a war he never wanted. He'd retired. He'd made peace. And then the Christians had betrayed that peace, breaking an oath that, to him and his culture, was sacred regardless of religion. Now he's back, and he's brought an army that represents the pinnacle of medieval military organization. On his flanks, he's positioned his elite Sipahi cavalry. These aren't just ordinary horsemen. They're Timariates, feudal lords who hold land in exchange for military service. Professional warriors with the best equipment money can buy. On the Ottoman left flank, facing Cardinal Cesarini's position, are the Anatolian Sepahis from Asia Minor. On the right, facing Hunyadi directly, are the Rumelian Sipahis from the European territories. They're fast, they're deadly, and they've crushed countless armies before this one. But the real terror, the absolute heart of Murad's army, sits on the hill where he stands. The Janissaries. If you've never heard of them, let me tell you, they were something entirely new in warfare. They weren't volunteers or feudal levies. They were the devvirm, the blood tax. Christian boys taken from Balkan families as children, converted to Islam, and raised to be fanatically loyal warriors serving the Sultan. It sounds brutal because it was, but it created something unprecedented. The first modern standing army in the world. Professional soldiers who trained together year-round, equipped with the latest technology, including firearms. They wait behind a defensive wall of sharpened wooden stakes and hidden ditches, an immovable fortress of discipline and firepower. Murad gives the signal. The battle begins. The Anatolian Sipahis on the Ottoman left thunder toward the Crusader right flank, held by Cardinal Cesarini and his knights. These Christian knights, desperate for glory and honor, meet the charge head-on. Cannons boom. Early firearms crack and pop. For a moment, the Ottoman charge falters. After a fierce, brutal melee, the Sipahis suddenly break and flee. It looks like a rout, but it's a trap. It's a classic Ottoman tactic called the feigned retreat. And Cesarini and his knights, blinded by pride and the intoxicating rush of what seems like easy victory, do the one thing Hunyadi had explicitly forbidden. They break formation. They chase. And the moment they do, fresh Ottoman reserves, hidden in a ravine just out of sight, slam into their exposed flank like a hammer. The Crusader right wing doesn't just break. It disintegrates. It evaporates into complete chaos. Cardinal Cesarini, the man whose passionate preaching had started this entire doomed crusade, is cut down in the panic. The arrogance he'd inspired had killed him. The battle's already a disaster on one flank, but John Hunyadi is not Cardinal Cesarini. As the right collapses, the other Ottoman wing, the Rumelian Sipahis, charges his position on the left. His veterans, a mix of Hungarians, Poles, and Czech mercenaries, lock their shields and brace. These aren't glory-hunting knights. They're professional soldiers, and they're anchored by that wagon fortress. The Ottoman cavalry crashes against them like a wave against a cliff. They hold. The line doesn't break. And then Hunyadi gives the signal he's been waiting for. The countercharge isn't a desperate gamble or a moment of passion. It's a calculated execution of a plan he's been building toward since the battle started. His heavy cavalry, held in perfect reserve, smashes into the Rumelian wing with devastating force. The Sipais, shocked by the discipline and sheer ferocity, falter, and then they break. The entire Ottoman right flank collapses into full panicked retreat, and here right here. John Hunyadi reveals why he's considered one of the greatest generals of his age. He doesn't chase. He doesn't make Ciceroni's fatal mistake. Instead, in a maneuver of breathtaking tactical brilliance, he wheels his entire victorious force around. He pivots across the battlefield and slams his heavy cavalry, still full of momentum and fighting spirit, into the other Ottoman flank, the Anatolians who are still disorganized from their easy victory over Ciceroni. The impact is catastrophic. In less than an hour, John Hunyadi, essentially by himself, has routed both Ottoman wings. The vast Ottoman army, which moments ago was on the verge of crushing victory, is now a fleeing mob. The only thing left standing is a small island of Janissaries on that central hill, standing firm around their sultan like a fortress in a storm. The field is otherwise clear. The battle is won. Hunyadi races toward his king, screaming for him to hold position, to be patient, to let the infantry and wagon forts move up and finish the job methodically. Victory is absolutely certain. All they need is patience. But King Władysław, 20 years old and burning with chivalrous fire, sees only one thing. He sees the Sultan's banner, isolated on that hill. He sees a direct path to glory greater than any king has achieved in 1,000 years. He could be the man who killed or captured the Ottoman Sultan. His name would live forever. He ignores his general's desperate pleas. He gathers his 500 elite Polish knights, his personal bodyguard. These are the sons of nobles, clad in shining plate armor, a living relic of feudal chivalry. They lower their lances. Hunyadi can only watch in absolute horror as his king throws away everything he's just won. The king's charge is magnificent. It's heroic. It's glorious. And it's utterly doomed. The charge hits the Janissary defensive position not as an overwhelming wave, but as a sickening crash. The heavy warhorses, moving at full gallop, slam into the hidden ditches Hunyadi never got close enough to see. They impale themselves on the sharpened wooden stakes. The charge's momentum just dies. The world's greatest heavy cavalry is suddenly a bogged-down, struggling mess, trapped by the very defenses they were meant to shatter. The Janissaries step forward. They're not cavalry to be swept aside. They're elite, modern infantry, and they do what they're trained to do. They unleash a disciplined volley of musket fire. The smoke chokes the air. Knights, unhorsed and weighed down by their heavy armor, are dragged to the ground. The glorious chivalric charge becomes a desperate, hopeless brawl. In the chaos, the king's horse is wounded. Władysław falls. A Janissary veteran named Kotahazar steps through the smoke, sees the royal armor, recognizes what he's found, and raises his blade. The crusade ends in a single, brutal moment. The Janissaries seize the king's head, fix it to a pike, and raise it high for everyone to see. The effect on the crusader army is instantaneous and total. The men who, just moments before, had victory in their grasp, now see their king, their anointed God-chosen king, dead, his head on a pike. Morale doesn't just fall, it vanishes. Panic rips through the ranks like wildfire. John Hunyadi, returning from his triumph on the flanks, finds not an army but a terrified leaderless mob. He desperately tries to rally them, even launching a furious, suicidal charge to retrieve the king's body, but it's hopeless. The battle is over. The Ottoman victory is total. Sultan Murad, standing on that hill, reportedly takes 3 full days to comprehend that he's actually won. That's how close it had been. That's how thoroughly Hunyadi had outfought him. But one rash decision, one moment of youthful recklessness, had turned certain victory into catastrophic defeat. The consequences of Varna ripple through history like a stone thrown into a pond. This defeat is the death blow to any hope of stopping Ottoman expansion into Europe. It's the last great, pan-European crusade against the Ottomans for centuries. The defeat shatters the anti-Ottoman alliance and leaves the Byzantine Empire already on its last legs, utterly exposed and alone. The road to Constantinople, the last bastion of the ancient Roman Empire, is now wide open. 9 years later, in 1453, Sultan Murad, son, the same 12-year-old boy who called his father back from retirement, rides into Constantinople as Mehmed the Conqueror. He's 19 years old, and he's just ended a 1,000-year empire. The medieval world is over. The modern age has begun. And you can trace the thread directly back to that moment at Varna when a young king ignored his brilliant general and charged to his death. The Battle of Varna remains one of history's great what-ifs. What if Władysław had listened? What if he'd been patient for just another hour? Could Constantinople have held? Could the Ottomans have been pushed back? We'll never know. What we do know is this. In war, the line between courage and foolishness is thin enough to change the world. Victory was there. It was real, it was won, and it was thrown away in minutes. So there you have it. One of the most tragic battles in history, where brilliant strategy was undone by reckless ambition. If this story grabbed you, if it made you think about how close history comes to going in completely different directions, then smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories from history that deserve to be remembered. Drop a comment below and tell me, could you have been patient in Władysław's position, or would the temptation have been too much? I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember, sometimes the hardest thing to do in any situation is absolutely nothing at all.